The EU has dedicated over 10 billion euros to dealing with the refugee crisis, financing projects to provide for the most urgent humanitarian needs of refugees arriving on European shores. Member states have also agreed to relocate asylum seekers from Greece and Italy to other EU countries. The basic principle will remain the same. Whenever a member state is overwhelmed significa praticamente quando in un paese c'è un afflusso piuttosto consistente di migranti. Whenever a member state is overwhelmed, there must be solidarity and a fair sharing of responsibility within the EU. The European Union is working towards establishing a security union, making Europe more secure by fighting terrorism and serious crime and by strengthening Europe's external borders. The EU and member states cooperate and exchange information to fight against terrorism and violent radicalization, serious and organized crime, and cybercrime. The EU is committed to helping and finance businesses and industry to generate growth and new jobs. The aim is to help European companies to become smarter, more innovative, and more sustainable. Research and innovation are essential to our economy and society. They create quality jobs, boost growth, launch new products and services. Horizon 2020 is the biggest ever EU research and innovation program, investing 77 billion euros to make people's lives better, providing us with the knowledge and solutions to urgent problems such as the 2019 coronavirus disease and long-term challenges such as climate change. Watch the video to find out more about the innovations promoted by Horizon 2020. The EU helps improve the quality of education by encouraging cooperation between member states through investments. For example, Erasmus+, the EU program for education, provides opportunities for young people to study, train, gain work experience, or volunteer abroad. With a total budget of 14.7 billion euros, Erasmus+ boosts the personal development of young people by giving them the skills they need in the labor market and society. Here's a couple of videos about Erasmus+, and once again, if you're interested, you can stop this video lesson to watch them, and then we'll meet back here. We all know that the rise in global temperatures has many consequences, including stronger and more frequent extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, and storms, which not only pose a direct threat to people, but can also jeopardize food production and create water shortages, which can in turn trigger famine, regional conflicts, and mass migration. The EU has a large range of policies and instruments in place for lowering emissions in response to changes in the Earth's climate. For example, the EU ratified the Paris Agreement, the first ever universal legally binding global climate change agreement. Remember what legally binding means? Legally binding significa giuridicamente vincolante. Quindi si tratta di un obbligo che deve essere rispettato dagli stati. This Paris Agreement, adopted at the Paris Climate Conference in December 2015, which limits global average temperature. Through the General Food Law, the EU protects the health of people, animals, and plants at every step, from farm to fork. It means that it guarantees that safe and nutritious food is produced or imported into the EU from healthy plants and animals, while enabling the European food industry to operate under the best possible conditions, preventing food contamination and promoting food hygiene. As I anticipated a while ago, there are several institutions involved in making decisions in the European Union. The European Parliament, which represents the EU's citizens and is directly elected by them. The European Council, which consists of the heads of state of the EU member states, which is not to be confused with the Council, also called the Council of the European Union, which represents the governments of the EU member states, and the European Commission, which represents the interests of the EU as a whole. We'll go through them one by one in a moment, but first, let me give you a general idea on how this decision-making process works. It is the European Commission that proposes new laws. It is the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union that adopt them. And it is the member states and the other EU institutions that implement them. The European Parliament. The European Parliament is elected by EU citizens in direct elections held every 5 years. Each member state elects a number of members of the European Parliament, a number that varies on the basis of the population of each member state. Members of the European Parliament organize themselves into political groups and various committees specialized in different subjects that examine proposals for new legislation in their particular area of competence. In terms of decision-making, the Parliament is responsible for approving, amending, cioè correggere, modificare, or rejecting EU laws and the EU budget, deciding on international agreements, deciding on enlargements of the EU, which means accepting countries that would like to join the European Union, electing the president of the commission and approving the full commission, and we'll see what the commission is, and reviewing the commission's work program. The European Council is made up of the heads of state of all of the EU member states, the President of the European Council, the President of the European Commission, and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. The European Council brings together EU leaders to define the EU's political program. It takes the form of usually quarterly significa trimestrali, of usually quarterly meetings between EU leaders, chaired, quindi presieduti, by the President of the European Council, who is elected by the European Council itself for a 2.5-year term. The European Council decides on the EU's overall direction and political priorities, but does not pass laws. It deals with complex or sensitive issues and sets the EU's common foreign and security policy, so the EU's external relations. It also nominates and appoints the President of the European Commission and the President of the European Central Bank. On each issue, the European Council can invite the European Commission to make a proposal and pass it on to the Council of the European Union to deal with. The Council of the European Union, or just the Council. Together with the European Parliament, the Council is the main decision-making body of the European Union. In the Council, government ministers from each member state meet to discuss, amend, and adopt laws and coordinate policies. The ministers who attend are those that deal with the policy being discussed and meet several times a year. So, for example, environment ministers meet in the Environment Council. The ministers have the authority to commit their governments to the actions agreed on in the meetings. Quindi praticamente i ministri hanno l'autorità di impegnarsi nell'applicazione delle politiche e delle decisioni prese nel proprio Stato. Ecco. The presidency of the Council rotates among the EU member states every 6 months and is responsible for chairing all Council meetings. The Council negotiates and adopts EU laws together with the European Parliament, coordinates EU countries' policies, develops the EU's foreign and security policy based on European Council guidelines, concludes agreements between the EU and other countries or international organizations, and adopts the annual EU budget together with the European Parliament. To be agreed, decisions usually require a qualified majority, which is 55% of the member states, representing at least 65% of the total EU population. Certain topics like foreign policy and taxation require a unanimous vote, which means all member states should be in favor. And a simple majority, which means that more than a half of the total should be in favor, is required for procedural and administrative issues.